Stephanie Williams. I'm Stephanie Williams, Director of Wayne State University Press. Before we begin, I have a few things that I need your help with. This discussion will be recorded. Please mute your microphone for the duration of the event. There will be time at the end for questions. Please type your questions into the chat box and we will refer them to our guests. If you don't already have a dozen copies of tonight's featured book, please order with coupon code INK3 at checkout. The link is in the chat box. Thanks again for being here tonight to celebrate the public launch of Guy Stern's new memoir, Invisible Ink. And now I hope you will join me in welcoming our very special guest, Wayne State University President M. Roy Wilson.
Well, thank you, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today for this very special celebration. I'm delighted that the press invited me to say a few words for this event. I think I know why. You know, some of you may know that I've been doing a weekly video really since about the beginning of the pandemic. I think my first one was in late March. The purpose of these videos is to really talk about the pandemic and what's going on, but also because I have a little more time these days, I don't have as many evening events. I read a book and try to read a book a week and do a book review near the end of my videos. And early on, I read Invisible Ink by Guy Stern, and I commented on it for my book review. I gave it a positive review, as I recall, and
Thank you.
but I commented, yeah, I commented on the following things. You know, first of all, I really enjoyed it because Guy Stern, he overcame adversity and social injustice, and obviously social injustice is something that's in a lot of attraction these days. And he did all that to have really a brilliant career. Secondly, he was a Wayne State faculty member, and I'm always interested in what Wayne State faculty members are doing. And then third, and please don't take this the wrong way, I mean this in really a respectful and endearing way, but I was so impressed by how sharp he was in remembering so many details from early in his life. And this was before I knew his age. But when I realized his age and when the book was written, which was, you know, I was just simply amazed. And I just think that it's just remarkable in all respects. And so please take that in the spirit, in the right spirit, because I mean that in a very respectful way. But perhaps most importantly, I just feel that stories like Guy's must be told and must never be forgotten. This memoir is the press's latest work in a nearly 80-year-long history of publishing in Detroit. Our prolific press publishes about 40 new books and 11 journal titles annually. It also has an extensive digital publishing program, including more than 950 press books and journals available on Project Muse, JSTOR, and popular ebook formats, including Kindle and Apple Books. In addition to tonight's featured title, the press is proud to have published more than 50 Wayne State faculty. University presses make available to the broader public the full range and value of research generated by university faculty. And I just want to thank all of our audience members once again for joining tonight's celebration. Invisible Ink is a beautiful and moving tale, one that, as I mentioned, that must not be forgotten. And I'm so grateful to Guy Stern and the Wayne State Press for preserving it for generations to come. Enjoy the evening, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Donald Haase, Professor Emeritus of German at Wayne State University, who has himself published with our press. Don?
Thanks, President Wilson. Guy Stern really, especially for this group, I think, needs no introduction, but I'll give him a brief introduction. I've made a career out of introducing Guy Stern. In fact, introduced him. I thought, well, that's my last introduction of Guy Stern. Then 8 years ago, he turned 90. There was a birthday celebration, and I was asked to introduce him again. So I thought, well, that's that. Well, here we are again, Guy. And I have to say that I really take delight and pleasure in introducing and reintroducing you again. But I'll keep it brief. You know Guy Stern, if you already know him or if you've read the memoir, and if not, you will know him after reading the memoir as a distinguished teacher and scholar of German studies for many years. Even though his focus was German studies, he really has an encyclopedic range and has written about many different topics and taught about many different topics. He's one of the leading founders of the field of exile studies. He's the founder of the American Lessing Society. Lessing was an important German figure of the Enlightenment. He's held principal positions in academic leadership as a chair, as a dean of College of Arts and Sciences, a graduate dean, and as provost here at Wayne State. He's been on the boards of national and international organizations. He's received numerous awards, the most recent being the French Legion of Honor, recognizing his role in the Normandy invasion. And in fact, he is one of the well-known or increasingly well-known Ritchie Boys, which I think we'll hear about later, which led to his co-starring role in an Oscar-nominated documentary film. So this is really a Renaissance man, a man for all seasons. And I've known Guy since 1968 when I was his student as a freshman in a German class, and got to know him better over the decades as a colleague and friend. And over those years, one would hear bits and pieces of Guy's life story, anecdotes that he would regale us with. But the whole narrative, the whole thread was never in full view. And we're really privileged, I think, that Guy has shared that story with us now in his memoir, which President Wilson has really beautifully described as an important and moving work. So, Guy, thank you for the memoir, and I'd like to begin there with the telling of the story. What was it that made now the right time to finally put your story between the covers of a book and to publish Invisible Ink?
Thank you, Don, for that very handsome introduction. Thank you, President Wilson. Thank all of you who are in attendance today and probably will fall asleep in a short while during one of my extended answers. So good luck to all of us as a team at WSU, and I still feel part of the team. So let me answer your question with a somewhat jocular remark. If you had asked me that when I started writing, I would have said what inspired me to write my autobiography, Don beats me. So I now, in retrospect, have a view of why I did this. Number one, it started really in a classroom. I was teaching in German studies a course called the European Short Story. And at the end of the semester, I said to the class, "There's one more assignment before you get your grades, and that is you have analyzed short stories from all over the and you write one." And my favorite student sort of wiped her brow as if she was sweating already over an assignment. She did very well, incidentally. And so I, at the end of the class, I said to myself, well, that might have been a unfair assignment, but you'll see. And so I said, try it yourself. So I wrote a short story, and darn it, they published it. And I wrote a second one. The honorarium was less, but nonetheless, they published it too. And at the third one, I thought, that's it. I can do it if necessary. But I haven't done it since. So I looked at those three stories and they interlinked. So I said, well, my ambition has been put to the test. I will now write a longer story and link everything that, or most of what happened in my life. And I found out a few things about writing an extended volume like that, and that is, Don, that uh, things seem to take in on a pattern and take on a meaning. And that meaning spurred me on. And then when I sort of said I might write my autobiography, so many people spurred me on. That was a second factor, and you were one of the culprits. So, and finally, I really, writing the last chapters, things had changed. Uh, Not always for the better. The discriminations, prejudices persisted and were growing. And I thought my very last chapter will be devoted not to me, but what we have to regain and expand in this country to be fair to the entire population. So these were some of the incentives that went into my mind.
Thank you. And that story, your stop life story, gives real importance and credibility to that last chapter, which is, of course, a timely chapter. Tell us about the title of the book, Invisible Ink.
Okay, I can tell you not only the genesis, but the date of birth, which was January 31st, 1933. Hitler had just been announced as coming in chancellor, and there was, our family was distraught, as were most of the decent people in town. And so uh, as I was mulling that, I thought to myself, uh, I need a title for the. It was very much far. It was pretty far along, and I didn't have a title yet. And I thought of that day in 1933, and I thought of what happened at our house. It wasn't a rapid change or anything, but my father, contrary to his habits, called my brother, about 5 years younger, Werner was his name, into our good room, as it was called at that time. And he said, you know, we are going towards difficult times. And he said, I have in a request of you two boys, you must not stick out. He who sticks out gets stuck. And he said, say that after me. I did, and Werner did. And that became a guide through a dictatorship. And then he said, once more, you gotta be like invisible ink. That doesn't mean that you will have to bury your true self, but you have to do it now. Invisible ink is your watchword. Now, that was a two-edged sword, and how so? And audience, I followed his command, and I also found that I couldn't shed it anymore. When I reached the United States, I was still under the power of that speech, the first speech he had given to us ever. And so I also followed the stages of divesting myself again of that command. And it was a slow process. I'll give you one of the last stages of it, or second last stages of it. And that happened on the day when I, being duly enrolled in an American high school, a wonderful high school, looked like a pre-pred school. And that I had in the meanwhile acquired a high-ranking job as a help busboy, and at a restaurant right next door to St. Louis University. And that evening of our prom graduating, I was on duty, so I couldn't attend my own prom. But I had slowly gotten rid of the inhibition imposed by my father. And so I was in my busboy uniform, and the prom was right next door to the dining room where I was performing my huge skills as a busboy. And then I had the temerity, a good English word, there's another one that's called chutzpah, to walk in uniform and all on all those jitterbugging friends and lady friends as in the room next door, calling attention, unwarranted otherwise, to myself. And today I am a bit more like the kid I was, rambunctious and all that of my formative years. And that name, Invisible Ink, that had guided me for better and worse, I thought was a sort of keynote for me. And that's why you found that title on the book that Wayne State has generously sponsored.
It's a good choice. Can you tell
Thank you.
more? Can you tell us more about your family, your parents, and your youth?
Yes. As I mentioned, I grew up in a rather small, medium-sized town, 65,000 inhabitants, called Hildesheim in the north of Germany. And how that my parents ended up there was again a circumstance that I'll have to describe. They didn't live in the same town, and distances at that time, which are today all of us with a car, would have been very easy to overcome, 84 kilometers, but it was a expedition when when we visited my grandparents with my mother, her parents, and so uh, what what it meant was in that case, as we were nearing the end of that book, I was saying to myself, yes, that's where I am destined to go. And so that took off from there, not to prolong the thing. But my mother and father met in my mother's hometown because my father was offered a better job than working for his older brother in a town so small it doesn't warrant a map really. It's called Ulrichstein. But my mother lived in a slightly bigger town called Floto. So my father was hired by a firm, a clothing firm, taken on as a journeyman, and became the master salesman of that clothing store. And that also determined his own occupation. He became a clothing merchant in Hildesheim, very small, and my family was an example of pulling yourself up by by the strings of your shoes. I don't go higher than that. And so my father, uh, I give you one example. When when my father settled in Floto and had courted my mother in the meanwhile, he uh, what he did is he went to the lady that he saw coming in. She was rather pretty, and served her, and that began uh, a process without which I would not be here, and neither would my autobiography. And Hedwig and Julius married and uh, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. I did go a little higher. So it was a very hard struggle, but I learned perseverance from that. They had splurged on only one item when they outfitted the apartment in Hildesheim, and that was an easy chair. And so when they were overcome by work, that's where one of them could rest and then turn around. And the sign of their victory over adversity came when they splurged once more and bought a second one. So that is the story of my background in Hildesheim and in Floto, and of that persevering family that made it after long struggle. And we were a happy family, and therefore and we were so definitely integrated into the town. My father even learned the local dialect, that when the Nazis came, we couldn't believe that all of a sudden people we had been friends with, also we kids, 3 Jewish kids in that high school class, that we were all of a sudden abandoned. ignored. And I was able to write something on that. It's also an incentive to go on with the autobiography. I was inspired by their perseverance and tried to emulate them. And when I felt so abandoned, that stuck with me, and I contributed to a German textbook for high school students, which was called "It Hurt No Longer to Belong." So that is the story of my background, my happy family. We went to synagogue. No, we went to a prayer room. The synagogues with their membership fee were fairly expensive. So we prayed in a very small prayer room. But I guess God is everywhere.
You left at the age of 15, if I recall correctly, for the US and underwent an extraordinary journey in your youth and into your adulthood that you called in an early autobiographical essay, if I'm not mistaken, the Americanization of Gunther. Can you tell us
Yes.
your what led to your leaving home, being sent abroad, and how the experience or how you experienced that Americanization?
Yes. I must say my Americanization began in Germany. When things really got rough, even physical abuse in the high school, I asked my father to take me out. He did, and hired for me a Mr. Tittle, a gentleman who had secured a contract for a 5-year stint of teaching at a Brooklyn uh, at a Brooklyn, not nursery, but at a higher grade than that, at a Brooklyn high school and in an orphanage. And so uh, when he got that job, he became Americanized himself, came back after those 5 years and had learned all the intricacies of American living, including baseball. And so he furnished me, when he became my tutor, with all the intricacies of a squeeze play and a double play and whatever we aficionados know. Then so I got not only baseball, but also the cheering fact that American high schools were co-ed, and also some of the customs that he's shared with us, shared with me. And so that was the uh, emergence through the Nazi years, very scary at times, a boycott of my father's store and all the Jewish stores on April 1st of 1934. And so it was all the more surprising because Hildesheim, for us, it didn't really matter what your background was, what your religion was, and that shattered over the next few months. And one fellow who was my best friend turned into my worst enemy because he was the smartest kid in the class, but propagandized by his Hitler Youth leader.
Well, once you got to the States, you were taken in by relatives and had a whole series of adventures that people can read about in the memoir. What I'd like to specifically ask you about, because it's one of the most interesting, I think, of many interesting and fascinating episodes in your life, are the Ritchie Boys. Tell us about the Ritchie Boys and how you ended up becoming one, and what that has meant for your life.
Yes. At the end of high school, I was able to, I had enough money saved to start at a university at St. Louis University as a freshman. And at the end of my sophomore year, Pearl Harbor occurred, and I was anxious to get into the service. So I followed a poster in the hallways of St. Louis University, and that poster said, if you have special skills like the language of our enemies, German or Japanese or Italian, come to our recruiting office. The US Navy can use you. I went down to in Midtown St. Louis, and this guy asked me about my skills and listened politely and answered. And then he said, yeah, you got most of the qualifications we need. But I heard an accent in your voice. So I said yes, because Mr. Tittle, though having acquired a Brooklynese accent, had not passed it on to me. And so I admitted to this fault of mine. And he said, well, can't use you. We can only use native-born Americans in our intelligence, Navy intelligence. So that meant he prepared me for going to the Army. And that happened half a year later. I was drafted. And a little bit after the draft, I found myself at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, being outfitted, and was sent down to Abilene, Texas, where Camp Barkley was housed, the Medical Administration Training Center, and started there. And about, I guess after I finished my basic training, running through the hot Texas sun and not acquiring a very perfect Texas accent, I was suddenly called to company headquarters. And the first sergeant looked at me and he said, Private Stern, you're shipping out. I said, yes, sir. May I ask where to? And he said, no, it's a military secret. And I said, yeah. And I tried to pin him down more very gently, and he wouldn't respond. I found myself the next day on a train all through picturesque desert of Texas, and ended up, and after changing trains, being picked up in a truck by together with two other fellows that have had the same orders, and found myself at a camp. The sign over it was Military Intelligence Training Camp. and we MITC, and we renamed it military camp with total intelligence, which was an exaggeration. And so that's where I got my first training in military intelligence. And it was even given the fact that later on I had a PhD from Columbia, it was the toughest course in my military and private uh, uh, training that I had ever had. And at the end of it, we thought, okay, now we are being tested, and we were. Well, I'll tell you, you may not want to copy that kind of test if you're called to a guest lecture, but we were given a clipboard with a number 1 to 50, and that corresponded to numbers that of military German and Italian equipment strewn over a huge meadow in the camp, and the highest officers were watching our performance. And what we had to do is identify each one of the objects of foreign make, from epaulets to Mauser guns to whatever you they had captured from the Germans. Nobody got 50 right, and I certainly didn't either. And then we thought, okay, now they can give us a promotion and stuff like that. So no, we were called into the auditorium and told, as your final step of testing, you will be going on a mock assignment attached to maneuvers in Louisiana. I only need to mention that that part of Louisiana was not as beautiful as New Orleans. There were swamps, whatever. We slept on the ground and were pretty well exhausted when we finally got back to camp. And that had finished us in military intelligence, ranging from learning the Morse code to close combat and to the type identification, and very important, squeezing information out of German PWs and getting inadvertently very inadvertently giving us information in public media that we recognized as important to our warfare, and that is how I was trained for the Ritchie Boys. We were, after that, we still stayed a little bit in camp, and then via Camp Hamilton in Brooklyn, we were shipped to Europe, and then got further instructions from the British, and from there started our participation in the greatest invasion ever attempted in warfare anywhere. And I landed on so-called D+3, which meant 3 days after the actual invasion, got ashore with a PT boat for, assault boats. And then I started 10 minutes later at our but at my first interrogation, because from a little distance away, one of my buddies who had come earlier on shore, I was immediately asked to join because what he shouted, "Get over here, Stern. We got too many," I delete something, prisoners over here to interrogate. So I'll tell you my first interrogation. It was with a artillery sergeant, battle-hardened, who knew the restrictions imposed on the treatment of prisoners by the Geneva Convention. So I went there, and the artillery sergeant, being very well briefed, said, "I don't have to tell you that. My name, rank, and serial number is all I have to expose to you." And I thought suddenly everything that I had learned at Ritchie was in vain. I had been thwarted and thought I was a failure. And then a curious accident happened. A an artillery or motor motorboat, I say, in deference to academics, a shell came over, and yes, we both went on the ground. But I immediately got up while he stayed down. And I said, "Get," and I used my language, which I don't do in the classroom. And so he got up very reluctantly, and he must have thought I was a hero, but it wasn't. I was inexperienced, that a first shell can be followed by second and third. And none of us got hit. And and he was cowed because he probably thought I was a hero in the making. And well, he answered my questions. I felt restored. I interrogated prisoners from the Normandy shores, Omaha Beach, till we arrived at a rendezvous with the Russians at the Elbe River. And I also started getting information. And then I got sort of tired. I was assigned to screen prisoners, which meant to try to extricate information from prisoners who were, as you might say, talkative, and who would be likely to expose information that was vital to our war effort. So I started teaming up with a friend of mine, Fred, because we used all the methods taught at Ritchie. But there were some information that no prisoner in his right mind would give away. And one of them was what was called targets. That was under Fred's charge. And Fred got very frustrated. He said, "What method haven't we tried yet that was taught at Ritchie?" And I said, "You haven't tried fear yet." And he said, "Well, what are those PWs afraid of?" And I, being longer ashore than he, said, "Well, they're really afraid of the Russians, of the Soviets, because they have heard of the bad treatment after they had given bad treatment while in Russia. So they were absolutely determined not to give us any information that would identify a target, a factory, or a or a railroad track. That was important. So he was stymied. And I said, well, if they're so afraid of the Russians, maybe we can do with something with that. He said, right, let's get a Ruski here. And I said, no, that's not possible. There are few at SHAEF headquarters, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, First Army. And I said, one of us has to turn into a Russian. And I was selected. So I got myself, like Hermann Goering, a whole batch of Russian medals that the Germans had taken as trophies from their prisoners, and also got a sort of phantasmagoric uniform. And I was a Russian, put on a Russian accent that I had learned from watching a comedy show every Sunday at my aunt and uncle's um, home, where I was given that generous hospitality. And there was a show called the Eddie Cantor Sunday Show. And he had a character called the Mad Russian. And so I imitated, in my perfect German, I imitated a Russian, and darn it, about 80% of those scared German pre-Ws caved in and gave us the information that was vital, like, for example, a railroad track that led to the main track. How did the Germans were able to immediately repair them? And then we learned from the prisoners that the Germans had reserved parts and reserved rolling stock that was put on the tracks once the bombarding was over. So this is just one example how my disguise helped getting very tough to get information. So that was my conversion into a Ritchie Boy in action, and we did that all during the war. Sometimes situations were a bit ticklish, but we did it.
It's a great story, and great stories within that one story. And after you've read the book, I'm addressing this to all the attendees here. After you've read the memoir, you should, if you haven't already seen it, really try to find a copy. It's easy to find, of the documentary, The Ritchie Boys. Guy is truly a co-star there with his colleague, with his
Thank you,
Howard, who, by the way, invented the displays, those drugstore displays for legs,
yeah.
the stockings, pantyhose in an egg. So the Ritchie Boys also made good after.
Fred was a good operator.
Yeah, he was. There are so many stories I'd like to ask you about, but we are starting to come up on 8 o'clock, and we do have one question from the audience, which is a rich one, from Al Saperstein. What, now that you've published the book, what event or aspect of your biography do you wish you would have included? Or
would not have written? Is that what you said?
What have you held back?
Oh, I see. One that has never been told before.
Yeah.
Okay, I need a moment to think. Take the catalog of my stories told and untold. Okay, there is a story which is not a success story because we were outsmarted. And this came at the end of the war, where we had a new assignment to discharge German and Italian prisoners. And the examination was very thorough, and we, for example, knew that a party member of long standing or member of the so-called SA or SS, the stormtroopers, had a tattoo of their blood type under their arm. They were prepared for the exigencies. And so we thought we were getting a getting a real run of the German prisoners, and we were discharging those who deserved to be discharged or moderately qualified for that. And but we had been egged on to be more severe and stuff like that by a operator who could have been a modern day operator as we know them. And so his name was Seeger, and he had always played the most helpful of the German PWs in our cause. And then we found out that he indeed was an operator. He took bribes or promissory notes from the prisoners and smuggled them out at night, even those we had rejected for, particularly those we had rejected for dismissal. So he admitted when we found traces of his doing, and recaptured some of them, but some of them got away, and here we were outsmarted, and this is a story that shamefully I never told.
Well, Guy, I'm sure you have much more material, and we're all looking forward to volume 2 of
you putting these screws on me again, as you have in the past for volume 1.
I wish we had time to hear your Paul McCartney story, but we'll have to save that for another time, or you can track Guy down. A few years ago, I read an interview with Guy in a professional journal in German studies, and I'm paraphrasing here. He was asked by the interviewer, what is it that has given you so much drive and energy and an endless capacity to be forward-looking and accomplish so much? And Guy said, again, I'm paraphrasing, I did not want to lead a meaningless life. And Guy, I can tell you, based on the memoir and based upon what so many of us know about you, that you obviously certainly have not. And you've brought a lot of meaning to many students, colleagues, and the public over the years, and you've done us a great service this evening, also in sharing your stories with us. So thanks very much, Guy. This has been great.
On the contrary, thank you, all, you and all people in attendance here, my friends at Wayne State.
Thank you all for being here with us tonight. You're welcome to, I hope you'll visit with us on our website at wsupress.wayne.edu. Emily's going to open everyone's mic. If you'd like to offer a round of applause or just say hello to Dr. Stern or to Don, that would be great. And again, thank you so much for coming tonight.